Hello and welcome to episode 267 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady. I'm joined by David, and if you are watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Spotify, whenever I'm able to get that figured out and get it uploaded, you can see us. For the first time, we're on video. This is something we've been working towards over the last month or so. Maybe a little bit of tease of that was me putting up a video interview I did, which I will certainly speak about multiple times on this podcast recording. It was time to get into the, mid 2020s and, be pivoting to video and have the video aspect as well. We want to be able to put a lot more stuff on the YouTube. I'm going to keep pushing the YouTube. It is at Thursday Night Podcast on YouTube, or I guess if you search it. You're probably going to have to tell the search engine to change yes, you do mean to type in Thursday with an E. You don't mean Thursday the day of the week, but I mean, we're used to that at this point. Spotify also has got the video component with their podcast, but if you are still listening to it, this should be still showing up in your feeds wherever you listen to your podcast, whichever of those are. And obviously, as we're transitioning, this stuff will be broken from time to time. I mean, it's the nature of technology. And so if you are a proprietor of our podcast and are unable to listen to it in the normal way that you usually have been able to, please get in touch, and I will try and see... Translation, Jordan will try and see what's gone wrong, and we will get that sorted for sure. But excited to branch out like this. Felt it was frankly, it's something we probably should have done a few years back. You could even argue maybe the entire time we've been doing this, but we're here now, and that's the most important thing. I would say it's the second most important thing. The most important thing is it's game week. And let me tell you, I think everyone needs game week. I think we have run the whole gamut on talking season.
Yeah, that's kind of the thought that I had going into last weekend. I don't know about you, but I hate the right before week 0 on ESPN, where it's you've got all that off-season anticipation. It's kind of done because there's going to be real football. It's week 0, but then it's not everybody who plays, which is fine. I'll take any college football. I watched some last week. 5 games
counting or with FBS teams in it?
I think so. But then you basically get, it's like the week of the bye during the Super Bowl, where it's what the stories are going to be. You kind of know where the narratives are going to go at this early point in the year, and then you just get 2 weeks straight of that. I don't know about you. I'm tired of talking about Arch Manning. I'm not saying that I think he's bad, or I'm not saying that I think about anything.
I just want to see him play.
Exactly.
So you can actually have a take on him playing other than the 2 times he's seen the field for Texas in his career.
Exactly. I don't know that he's going to be good this year, and the only thing that I've seen wasn't good. Maybe he is good. I don't know, and I want to just see him.
He did look pretty good just running full speed down the field again. Was it the ULM game or UTSA? He had one of those highlight plays running, and people were like, oh, this guy's not Peyton Manning. He's a 2025 quarterback who uses his legs.
Exactly. I want to see that guy, and we'll have an opportunity this weekend.
Along with Georgia State's game, Panthers open up at Ole Miss. Another time, both times now, Del McGee's seasons have started on the road against power conference opponents, which has been a rarity in Georgia State's history. A lot more home games, and certainly not that many against power conference competition. So more of the same in his tenure, which has been a change from basically the entire existence of GSU football. But wanted to, again, take the opportunity to tease. I did an Ask the Expert with Michael Katz of the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal, which is on the YouTube. And again, once we get all of our tech realms in order, that should also show up in the feed wherever you get your podcast. Don't want to remove that component of it. That was a deep dive. He covers the Rebels for the Daily Journal, and so he was able to give the ins and outs of the game from their perspective, kind of players to watch for, the scenarios of if it goes better for Georgia State, why might it? If it's going pretty well for Ole Miss, how quickly is he going to call off the dogs? Those sorts of things. And if you're traveling for the game to Oxford, some recommendations at the end of maybe where to eat, where to go to take in the ambiance of that college town. So certainly check that out, and that's probably going to be the majority of Like, that's going to be the Ole Miss talk, whereas I think in years past when we haven't had guests every time, we kind of do it all at once. So I think we're going to be a lot more Georgia State focused. But before that, I will hit some bio for this game, just hit the basic facts. 7:45 Eastern, 6:45 local. It will be broadcast on SEC Network if you are not making the trip. And if you didn't know, chances are this feels like one of the top 5 college head coaches you'd know right now. Lane Kiffin is the head coach of the Ole Miss Rebels. He's been there now. This will be year 6. He's 44-18 in that time. He's 105-52 all-time as a college coach, dating back to his time. 1 year at Tennessee, a few more years at USC, time in the NFL as well. He's kind of set the blueprint for a really good SEC program, so Georgia State is going to have their hands full. They're coming off back-to-back double-digit win seasons in the SEC. The one note, they are replacing their quarterback. Jackson Dart went in the first round of the NFL draft to the New York Giants. Austin Simmons, a lefty, will be taking the reins of the Ole Miss offense. And so, no surprise, that was kind of one of the things Michael Katz mentioned in our Ask the Expert is kind of the major things to watch, just because it will be his first start as a college athlete. And so I guess if you were hoping upon hope from a Georgia State perspective that this is a close game, closer than the experts think, maybe the easiest angle to take there is he's a little bit not as sharpest. He's a younger guy. Mistakes maybe here or there that you wouldn't expect from a veteran like Jackson Dart. So I guess that's the angle you're kind of hoping for. But I guess I'll open up the board metaphorically and see where you want to take this, David. I've certainly been talking for a few minutes here, so let you take the game preview where you want to take it to start.
I mean, hilariously, that is where I wanted to start, just because I can't remember the last left-handed quarterback that Georgia State faced. I don't think they faced any last year. And I know that they have faced a few in their career.
The one that comes
program.
to mind, Alex Hornibrook at Wisconsin in 2016. I can't say for sure that's the last one. And he also didn't start the whole game. I think, if I'm remembering right, he came in and kind of saved that game for them, because that was one of those Power Conference games that Georgia State was in the fourth quarter. And that was a 3-9 team. So, but I can't think of... I'm sure we're missing an obvious one. I can't think of any Sun Belt quarterbacks that were lefties that they would have played against.
Was Holton Ahlers there at ECU when Georgia State
right.
played them?
Yes.
Okay.
In the 2020 game in Center Park. So you found one more recently. So
yeah.
Rarity. And old heads will remember the great hope that was Amir Scaife. Georgia State could have, maybe had a lefty starting quarterback back in the mid-teens, following on from Nick Arbuckle. It didn't really pan out like that, but who was the first guy we really, I think collectively were like, man, this guy's big, athletic, he can throw it down the field, this is the guy. And he ended up closing out his career as a tight end, so kind of the textbook path to it didn't work out for you as a quarterback, and you end up playing tight end. Also not the first Georgia State quarterback to do that, but I think we did land on the answer. I can't think of any between now and 2020 and now that would have been a lefty, but
I can't
certainly
either.
rare. I mean, there's one in Atlanta now, Michael Penix Jr.
That's true. I'm curious if they're going to flip the defense, because I know that there are some defensive coordinators who will see that offenses are playing left-handed, offenses will have a left-handed quarterback, and they will try to flip the defense to try to match kind of what a right-handed quarterback's look would be, so to speak. These are college kids, so maybe that won't happen. But I do think that it is worth noting that there is some turnover on Ole Miss's roster, specifically at the quarterback position. We've talked...
the defense. Lots of guys on the defense.
Correct.
Who are in the league. Very good players.
Correct. And I think that's where you kind of have to look at this and say... somebody asked me, I think today or yesterday, if this was the potential for a 2019 Tennessee situation. And I was like, no, not necessarily because of anything Georgia State related. But I think the realistic take here is just like you said at the beginning. Lane Kiffin is probably, on a very short list of college head coaches who have not won a ring now. he's up there, easily top 5 in that conversation. This is not somebody who necessarily messes around in games like this. And so that would put the onus more on Georgia State to really come out there and, I guess shock some people. No pun intended, but I don't necessarily see it, even with all of the changes going on with Ole Miss so far.
I guess you mean no callback intended.
Yes.
Less a pun, more the lore of Dan Ellington. I guess fitting along with what you said, though, we didn't expect 2019 Tennessee. Like, that wasn't expected. That happened. And, I mean, there's things to look at. I remember we were talking about, like, this new offensive coordinator, Brad Glenn, seems to be, like, what Sean Elliott wants in a play caller. This seems like a nice fit, but we were very tentative. The only thing I remember about that episode is we had David Shealy on because he was up in Knoxville covering Tennessee at that point. It was a nice, alumni connection. This will be a fun episode. Me and Jordan went as a trip, and it was like, all right, last game that I had ever done where I wasn't in the press box covering a Georgia State game, and then it turned into what it turned into. And I think along with that, it was Ed Kearney gets I forget if they even called it a fumble or interception on the first play of the game, because just the ball never hit the ground, but it might have technically been a fumble. You get that play, you score immediately, you grab the momentum, you stunt the excitement of the Tennessee crowd, and then just never really let it slip. They handled the ebbs and flows of that game tremendously well. Ditto against Vanderbilt last year. Kevin Swint gets the strip sack of Diego Pavia on the first drive of the game. They don't get a touchdown, they just get a score, but immediately, as they're the ones trying to grab a hold of the game, they were able to have the first momentum play. And as you'll remember, it really shouldn't have even been close late. They let it slip, and they almost blew a bad lead. That it would have been a whole different story. Ted Hurst isn't the hero on that final drive, but that's kind of the formula you're looking for in any one of these games. Not take out make it the hypothetical, take out who you're playing. It's you need to have a big play, probably a turnover on defense and a quick score, if you are the team trying to overcome a massive, spread and win as a major underdog. And so, if we're halfway through the first quarter and Georgia State's already down 2 scores, that feels like most of the formula's already taken away. If you want this to be a game, and I'm not really I think that they can cover in this game, but I'm not necessarily going to give you the forecast for this is how they pull off the upset, because it's a good Ole Miss team, very talented, and they play at Kentucky next week. Then they host Arkansas, so they're already playing 2 of the SEC games in September, and then they play Tulane at the end of the month, who's one of the better G5s. And so there's not going to be a lot of messing around for them. And so whether it's that they want to give the first 2 guys more reps or whatever, whichever permutation you run down, I kind of think that they're going to be with the starters for as long as they can get. Maybe if it gets really out of hand, they'll eventually pull them, but I kind of think they're going to get some more out of these starters, which is a bad formula. And last year they put up 70-something on Furman. They beat Georgia Southern 52-13. They beat Middle Tennessee 52-3. So this is not that team because they lost some key contributors, but that's kind of your precursor for how it was last year, how he handled those situations. And the other thing to mention there, as we're kind of poo-pooing the idea of any kind of fun on this, thanks for listening to this podcast as we tell you Georgia State's going to lose. Georgia Southern, I mentioned, lost to them 52-13. I don't believe that was a cover for them. They still won 8 games. I'm giving the double whammy of not only saying Georgia State's going to lose, but highlighting wins that the rival Georgia Southern got. But their season was fine after losing a game to Ole Miss handily. So even in the eventuality that this game does not go Georgia State's way, and even if the score looks a bit ugly, doesn't really matter. And so kind of where my mind goes is what can you take from this game? If it's not going to be an upset, what do you have in mind? And I wrote a few things down. I've gotten ideas of some of them may be realistic goals. Maybe one of them I wrote down is more of a reach, maybe more of an aspiration, but less of an aspiration than just outright winning on the field. But you can still take things away from this game because at the end of the day, Georgia State's got 11 more games after this that arguably matter more, other than the paycheck, which matters a great deal in this one. Thanks for the $1.6 million. But there's things that you can get from this game, I think, that might not have to do with the score, might have to do with how close it is or whatever, but still matter for the trajectory of Georgia State's season that I think we could maybe learn. Not major things, but just kind of a hints here or there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I want to see how they look in terms of being a competent offense. There is a difference between, there was a play in one of the games that I watched last week. Just a slot receiver, getting an out route like 8 yards on like second down or whatever. And the defensive back really did not do anything but hit him after the ball was caught, and it turned into an incomplete pass. To me, that is still a competent. It was. I think it was the Kansas game. So I think it was Fresno State.
You're like, hold on to the ball, but that was a nice route.
Right, exactly. Like, yes, obviously, hold on to the catch. You got to complete that, but for the most part, you did your job as a wide receiver. You did your job as a quarterback and as a protection. And I think specifically as it relates to Ole Miss and their aspirations, if Georgia State is continually doing that for 60 minutes, they're going to have some plays where a very physical cornerback is going to hit somebody, Ted Hurst, whomever, and jar a ball loose. Maybe, Vayer is going to throw a ball that against the Sun Belt defensive back is certainly not a highlight reel interception, but turns into one on Saturday. Okay. But was the decision to throw okay? How was the arm strength? Stuff like that. Like, those are the things that you can take away from games like this. And yes, there's going to be nerves. Like, it's, a nighttime SEC contest. Like, I get it. It's, I think also to your point about Ole Miss starters, this feels like the type of game where they're going to get a lot out of their two deep and just like rotate guys in and out all throughout the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. It's really not going to be until the fourth quarter where you're going to say, okay, they've really started to go, into the depth chart here.
You hope. Or, if
fair.
the starters are in the fourth quarter, great sign for Georgia State. They're like, just put that marker down.
Also true.
If you want just a realistic, maybe more of a reach goal, if their starters are playing in the fourth quarter, it means it's a game. Whether that's like it's a 10-point game or even if it's just like a 17-point game and you just can't risk it, that'd be a win.
Absolutely would be a win. I don't think there is any version of a successful Ole Miss team that would be happy if Georgia State, even if Georgia State goes undefeated after this game, there is no version of a successful Ole Miss team that would be happy with Georgia State hanging within 20 points of them on Saturday. But for the Panthers, that would be huge.
I have maybe slightly more aspirational goals than like hold on to a pass or whatever. I slightly lost the metaphor there. But the one that stands out is, obvious, the guy we probably talked about more than anyone else individually on this podcast, Ted Hurst. I'm not going to look up because I don't care about like what the number actually is, but I just wrote down Ted Hurst hitting whatever his player prop is, because this is an important game for him. I think as we've spoken about, probably the first game scouts are going to turn on to see how he does against these type of DBs. And so there's that component of it, but deeper than that, we think that a lot of defenses are going to try and silo him and give him a lot of the attention. And I kind of think Ole Miss is going to use this game to test their own DBs. Like, not to say there won't be times where he's doubled or bracketed or whatever, but I kind of sort of think that they're going to want to see how their guys perform on an island against a good wide receiver because, like, they feel comfortable they're going to win this game. But, like, so what if, like you don't need to know how you're going to do bracketing a guy who, if you do that, I mean, congrats, you're probably going to take him away. It gives you a lot more for the season if your DBs who are not that long from then having to deal with Garrett Nussmeier in the LSU offense. Like, give them a test on an island, working through their communication, making sure they don't lose this guy. And I think that could be to Georgia State's benefit because one of the things that Michael Katz mentioned in the Ask the Expert that we did, they do lose some in the defensive backfield. And even last year on a very good Ole Miss defense, big plays in the passing game were an issue. And so it kind of feels like a situation where it even might just be one play. Like, even if Ted Hurst is like 2 catches, 75 yards, but one of those is like a 60-yard touchdown where he just gets over the top of a guy and Christian makes the throw. that feels like a win for Ted. It feels encouraging for, I guess, the offense that you can make a good defense like this with full of SEC athletes. You can beat them on a chunk play like that. And I also kind of think that you're not going to down to down have a lot of success. Like, I think they can have, they could score. If they score probably 3 times, I think I'd probably say they're probably covering at that point. But I don't think they're going to do it with like 15 play drives where they're just milking the clock down and getting 4 yards at a time. I think they're going to have some TFLs where they're just going up against a defensive front that's very big and man movers. And so I think if you're trying to have success on offense, might be a game where even if you want to be more successful consistently throughout the year, this might be one where you're hoping to just hit on a couple explosives and just kind of cheat your way to the points that way. And I think that we're heading into year 2 at Ted Hurst with what he did last year. I think it would be an encouraging game 1 for him if you see him hit one of those big plays. Might not be, it might be the thing that makes it 45-7 instead of 45-0, whatever point in the game is. I don't know, but that's certainly something that I've got my eye on. Just because I kind of think it doesn't really suit Ole Miss either to just try and fully take him away. Like, they're gonna want to experiment and really test their guys because SEC schedule is right around the corner for them.
Yeah, and kind of to that point, I want your take on the running backs and like the ground game, because I think, to say this rather respectfully, there is a chance that Georgia State's running game is going to be headed towards a brick wall on Saturday. And I don't think this is the type of game necessarily where just abandoning the run at they might not necessarily be playing for football script reasons, if that makes sense. So knowing that, is this something where you're just going to continue to run the ball just to get guys work and to get their legs underneath them? Or should they continue to try to see what else they can muster in terms of a passing attack? And I know that last year the passing attack was good, but there are some new faces.
I mean, first of all, you're going to run the ball because you want to run the clock. Especially at a certain point in the game, you're just going to want to shorten the game. So I certainly think that will be a factor in. Hugh Jackson wants to run the ball more. I think Dell wants to run the ball more than they did last year. And also in a game like this, the more time you can give your defense on the sideline, the better. But I am glad you mentioned this. Just like we didn't coordinate our gray polos to both wear for the first time on camera, you teed me up for this because that was another thing I wrote down. This is probably the reachy goal that I have. Sack-adjusted rush yards per carry being 3 or greater. And it's a major caveat there with sack-adjusted. But if you look at some of the totals that they had last year, they were a very good run defense, and none of the G5 or FCS opponents had any success. Even if you could give sack-adjusted, those numbers still aren't pretty. So it would be kind of a stretch. 6 of the 12 teams they faced got their sack-adjusted or non-adjusted. Not a lot of success overall. Very good, stout defense. But even in a game, whatever the score is, if they're approaching that, where they've found success, and again, this might be that you just pop one explosive and largely you don't have a lot of success, but you find a way to get one chunk. The thing we're wondering about with this offense is how much better can the run game be? And so if you're able to do anything against this Ole Miss front that is very good, and I expect to not drop off despite the talent that they lost to the draft last year, that would be a major sign of encouragement, no matter how the rest of the game goes. And so I don't know how feasible 3+ yards per carry sack adjusted is. Certainly I would not put it as a realistic goal unadjusted, but if you're looking for not the upset, I feel like that would be the next biggest win. Because really a lot of what this team hopes happens rests on them being able to run the ball and the guys they brought in. And certainly when you look at it, I think fans are just excited to see Branson Robinson, big name, comes from Georgia. Rashad Amos and Jordan Simmons both had some success at G5s previously. DJ Braswell has had great spring and fall camps. I think there's a lot of excitement. I mentioned him when we did the running backs preview. That's the part of the team I think the new exciting names are. And so just from a fan perspective of looking forward to the rest of the season, if you get a nice 30-yard run from one of those guys, it's going to be the thing you remember from this game. Funnily enough, I basically only have offensive takes because the other thing I had is realistic goal, not feeling worse about quarterback. And the reason I feel kind of comfortable saying that, famous last words, is the stuff with Christian last year didn't really start until midway through the year. There was the weird fumble where the miscommunication happened in the Georgia Tech game and he wasn't ready for the snap. But other than that, and a couple throws maybe he wants back, there were some dropsies in that game. We didn't leave the Georgia Tech game with alarm bells ringing. And so I think if you get through this game, can't say you'd necessarily, if you're going to have a turnover, this is the defense you'd probably pick them to get him to throw a pick against or whatever, but you kind of bake that in, so you're grading on a little bit of a curve. I think it is possible that we can keep kicking the quarterback thing down the road, and maybe there's a point in the season where it comes up again, and if the improvements haven't taken for Christian Veer, but I think it is possible that we can still enter week 2 against Memphis not really feeling any different. Believe me, if that's not the case, we'll certainly talk about it next episode, but those are kind of the benchmarks I laid out. And along with, if you can force a turnover on defense, I feel like that'd be a nice thing, because kind of an issue for that defense last year. You're playing an SEC team, and like we mentioned at the start, first start for Austin Simmons, I don't want to call it nerves or whatever, but maybe you're catching before he's really hitting his stride, and opportunity for the defensive backs to maybe get one play, run off the sideline, run off to the sideline, be happy celebrating a pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of why I didn't even consider a quarterback-focused, goal for this game is I feel like there's not going to be... There would have to be an injury, for there to be some sort of huge red flag for me in this one. Maybe if Veer starts to stand in the pocket and literally hand the ball to, the Rebels, okay, sure. I guess I just don't know what I can really take away from this game if it's bad. There's a chance that I could take more good away from this game than bad, sure, simply because of one, his experience. This isn't a true freshman quarterback or a guy who doesn't have experience. That Georgia Tech game was very close until the very end last year, and I don't think that the reason they lost it was specifically on Christian. And then number 2, it is the beginning of the season, and I am willing to give guys, yes, they've had summer to practice. Yes, they have, had some fall practices. How many times have we seen guys look extremely lost and not on the same page in week 1 and then turn out to go win their conference by the end of the year?
I mean, I mentioned the dropsies. Do you remember who had one of them in the end zone on 2-point play?
Yeah.
It was Ted Hurst.
Exactly.
It was
he didn't show up until the second or third game last year.
Yeah, he got a touchdown against Chattanooga, and it was this guy's looking good. But the first play, the first time we noticed him, it was I think there were 6 drops in that game. So it was and some of that's like I say, you're factoring in that there's going to be some sloppiness. Ole Miss doing the same probably. It might that might be a different equation, and so the score ends up more in their favor even if they play the same amount of sloppy, but that's kind of the score. I guess I basically am just saying I don't think it'll be disaster start. And so that's why I say the famous last words. I don't think it'll be 6 of 20 with 4 picks. If it is, that's when you start having the conversations. But I
Sure.
think we can keep going along. It seems like, again, no one really won the job from him because he's still the starter. I think there's some confidence, and really just feels like the run game will be the thing that if it hits, that's what's going to help him more than anyone else. And that would also be the case for Rivers quarterback. But we need to see what a consistent week-to-week running game does to help his game as well, because if you're dropping back to pass less, you're throwing less interceptions just definitionally. But weird. I guess the other reason you're not looking at upset watch as much as Lane is taking this game deathly seriously. He's got a lot of respect. I mean, probably helps that he knows Del McGee. Probably lost a few recruiting battles to Del McGee, the recruiter, especially when they came into the Peach State. Saying all the right things, putting up stuff like Georgia State was 1-0 in the SEC last year. Sorry. That was on their like screens around the football building there in Oxford, and other ones about Vanderbilt. Well, I guess that was about Vanderbilt. Then those are the ones about Tennessee, like the box score from that game. And so you had that. You also had someone, and I don't know that it actually ended up being the football offices. That might have been a Photoshop deal or AI or something, but making up quotes about Enrique Davis, the Georgia State running backs coach, who is an alum of Ole Miss. That was the first thing I saw that was like, okay, maybe there is something to worry about here if they're resorting to this type of stuff on social media, where it's like, this guy's an alum. What are you doing making it out like he's... It was like the most like NBA Centel quote ever. Like you would read it and be like, he did not say this. The tweet got taken down, so I would have like referenced it what it actually said just for posterity's sake, but it got deleted, so it will... And I didn't take a screenshot, so it will remain that way. Coach Davis put out a vehement denial on social media. It's like, I didn't say that, and all the Ole Miss people are like, yeah, no, he didn't say that. Like, he loves Ole Miss. Like, this is the silliest thing to get dragged into. But kind of the mix there. Like, the good side and the bad side of the quote-unquote bulletin board material, however real that other one was. Which I still feel like the second one was really just a social media thing, because I only saw it from one guy with not that many followers, and I could not confirm the truthfulness of whether there was actually something on a TV screen in the football building there. The other one was a reputable reporter who covers the team who showed that screenshot. That one definitely was a thing highlighting Georgia State. It's a long way of saying you also want teams to be... You want to sneak up on them in these spots, and I don't think that's happening here. So another one in the negative column for Georgia State's chances of winning this one. But we just laid out some things you can hope for, and also just I think they can still cover. The line got as big as like Ole Miss is 38-point favorites. Last I checked tonight, it's 35.5. And even as it's lowered, and I think it's right that it's lowered some, I think Georgia State can stay within that number. And I think if they do that, and if they can certainly keep Ole Miss in like the 40s and not the 50s, maybe even the 30s, that certainly would be a win. You'd feel good. Past that, I mean, you're hoping upon hope for the type of upset that happens maybe once every couple seasons. And so kind of just being real and just saying, like, we know where the stakes are, but, if you're going, it's going to be a fun new stadium. Certainly I'm excited to be going, getting a new SEC stadium. I haven't checked, like, I'm about halfway, I feel like.
You've got to be by this point.
Because I went to Sanford once as a ticketed audience member, a fan. So that one, SEC, South Carolina, Tennessee, went as a ticketed fan. Certainly, I've still got that ticket stub.
Went to LSU.
Auburn, LSU.
Yeah, Auburn.
Yeah, thank you for knowing where I went when I didn't know. Well, I guess when it expanded, the number got a lot bigger. But Vanderbilt going to get later next month, so gonna be rounding out about halfway through all this SEC stadiums. Just an exciting secondary part of this. Looking forward to it. I think that you can talk yourself into a lot of outcomes where this ends up being fine no matter what the score is. And lest we forget, and I'll mention again, $1.6 million is a nice addition to the Georgia State coffers as well. And so it is what it is. It is the economics of college football. Georgia State will be a beneficiary of it no matter how the game goes on the field this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not somebody who thinks that G5 schools should shy away from that fact. Like that is the reality of it. I know that things might change in that respect going forwards, but the reality of the situation right now is Georgia State got a check. Georgia State's got a football game on Saturday.
Yeah, I guess we can hit that real quick before we go to like our last segment, hit the pick'em for the season. But SEC going to 9-game conference schedules, which I think a lot of people have been hoping for. The league had been resistant, but it seems like they finally won out. Whichever they you want to make it, that is ruining the game of college football. But that will have an effect on scheduling. Personally, I think the first effect will be, I think you're going to start seeing a lot of games just literally get scheduled or moved around, whatever. Like, you've already seen some of it. If you track this stuff, that you're seeing teams moving games around, putting them on the schedule. Part of the agreement with the SEC is one of their 3 non-conference games has to be Notre Dame or another power conference team. It's just the rules I guess they're agreeing to follow. And so there's already a lot of teams that have 4 non-conference scheduled or 3 scheduled, but all 3 of them are FCS or G5s that are having to reschedule games. I think you're going to see a lot less P4 teams go to G5s, which is a bummer. I think Georgia State could possibly keep the Wake Forest game they have scheduled in 2030 because Wake Forest is already scheduled to host Maryland that year. So possible that one slides through, but in this current moment, it feels like those are less likely to be on the schedule now. And so Georgia State might have their last one for a while. Vanderbilt might have been their last one for a while. And then Wake maybe stays, and then, who knows from there. But I kind of don't think these games are going anywhere, mostly because I think everyone understands that the model of the sport is very much based on these bye games. I'm curious to see if you start seeing, you have to schedule FBS teams start to come out, in which case it starts to be the FCS play only G5s, which probably works. I guess that kind of just turns into a bit of a trickle-down situation. I still think there will be shakeup, but I ultimately don't think that these types of games are going away. And, frankly, these programs, especially the mid-lower tier in these power conferences, still want at least one game on the schedule they can look at and feel comfortably they're going to win. So for that obvious reason as well, that these coaches don't want to just, keep posting 3 and 9s and hope their job's not going to, they're not going to have to go on LinkedIn. Whether or not they're going to win all those games, certainly upsets happen all the time, but I kind of think it's silly to think they aren't still going to want to try and, quote, schedule wins. So I think it'll still, the sport will still exist in some way like it did with that kind of interconnectivity, but I think ultimately you'll see a lot less griping from, you see Alabama's playing Eastern Illinois and a G5 or 2 in their non-conference. That has started to be a narrative that's worked against the SEC that they're fighting. And so they had to make kind of a big swing here, up their competitiveness, and try and get it to where they can have the playoff spots rigged how they want them to be rigged. And so ultimately not necessarily happening for the best reason, and I don't think it's going to be a net positive for G5s, but if you were thinking they're not going to ever show up on the schedule again, I kind of don't think it'll take that path. But yeah, I've been wrong before.
I definitely agree with that. I will just say this all is very funny to me because we could have just expanded the playoff and done everybody do a 9-game conference schedule, and we probably would not have needed any realignment if this happened 5 years ago. It would have been totally fine with what it was.
And I just is Oklahoma gonna have regrets in 3 years? Sure, the paychecks, the TV money will be great, but it was probably already pretty good in the Big 12.
They ran it. They wrote them in Texas wrote the bylaws for that conference. So
Texas is adjusted a lot quicker, so they're probably fine and they're getting more money and they're basically national championship favorites every year. They certainly are this year, one of the top teams. Oklahoma, maybe they would have been this bad anyway in the Big 12 if they just had issues under Brent Venables, but it's are you already feeling a little bit like it was nice to play the Big 12 and, at worst you'd be 9-3, not fall into 6-7? Certainly not our problem.
Certainly not.
You do what you guys want to do. I'm questioning whether this is going to pay off in the long run, except for the people who get extra checks that, aren't the general fan base. It's not like it helps Oklahoma writ large. It just helps very specific people at Oklahoma or running the program of Oklahoma in the department.
And that's the thing. I think this is a good change for schools. I enjoy the competition of the extra conference game. I think it's one thing because when did the Big Ten switch to 9? I believe it's been relatively recent.
It was either last year or the year before. It has not been very long.
Exactly. But the last couple of seasons in the Big Ten have felt different than, all right, it's just Ohio State, it's whoever wins the big game versus, all right, we're sacrificing Wisconsin this year to the Wolves, or, there was the couple of Northwestern
Well, that's the
years.
divisions as well.
It is.
That's
it
more
is.
the division.
But the reason it was frequently tied like that was just because of how many games that they played and the way that the division structure happened. Yes, you could undo that if you only got rid of the divisions. I'm not disagreeing with you there. And they did that, but I don't know. It just 9 feels like a better number to me, and it just makes more sense. I don't know.
I also think that we don't really know what equilibrium is going to be in college football, and so I think right now this is worse for G5 because you like those opportunities to host these programs. It matters a great deal, especially if you can get a win. The SEC win over Vanderbilt was like the biggest thing Georgia State could hold their hat on, hang their hat on in the season where they only won 3 games last year. So like it matters, and it is a problem right now. But I don't know what 10 years from now in the sport looks like, and so it's like right now it doesn't look good, but stuff like 2005, like Troy hosted Missouri. Like, it used to be a lot more commonplace, and this thing has ebbs and flows, and so I don't necessarily think it's trending in a direction that makes me think it's going to be suddenly very pro G5 in the way that everything shakes out. I guess I should say G6 because the Pac-12 is coming, but we don't know, and so it's for right now. I kind of expect to start seeing more of Georgia State's future schedule start to come out. I mean, they need 2 games for 2026, so certainly we need to see something on that pretty quickly. But I think the short term we'll start to see a lot more schedule stuff drop, so these schedules fill out because you've had programs either not scheduling or, really just a lot like not even getting 4 games because you figured you're going to have to cancel it and you're going to have to pay. That's, unplugged. And so now the rest of the 2020 should start to see more full schedules. And certainly Georgia State will be a part of that. And I'm not trying to be the devil's advocate, but there will probably be some fun out of conference power conference teams playing each other that wouldn't have happened before that will ultimately be a good product. Is it at the detriment of Group of 5 programs? Certainly. But there are going to be some matchups that begrudgingly we're all going to reach for the remote and turn on the TV and watch in the middle of September in what would have normally been, a stretch of games early in the year that sometimes is hard to get fans excited for because of the way programs have been scheduling in the past. I guess we're not done talking about other teams because we're going to end this week doing our pick'em. We've organized it. We got a Google sheet this year. I guess we'll pull up the Sun Belt games. I'll pull up ESPN for the Sun Belt games this week because that's going to be the priority of our pick'em. We're going to pick every Sun Belt game this week and for all the season. Going to throw in some others. David's running this thing, so he's kind of dealer's choice in that regard, but decided to do all the Sun Belt games, and we'll try and expedite the process because we're picking them ahead of time this year. Last year was a little bit more avant-garde. We'll not dwell too much on the games. We both pick the same team. We'll just maybe have one of us hit something on it, but I guess
yeah. I mean, I think this year for a pick'em, it does make sense to talk about the Sun Belt. I think last year there were times where we would hit the Sun Belt, but then talk about some other games. But I also like talking through some of the stuff that happens in the conference. Obviously it's local, that part of it does matter. Yes, it does matter if Charlotte beats App State this week because Georgia State plays App State this year. These are things that does matter, but it's also fun to just see what else is going on in the conference, even if we, dislike them, some of them. Let's see. I think I put this in order that is going to be on ESPN outside of Georgia State. Obviously, Georgia State is going to be first since we have that marked.
A couple of weekdays.
Yes. I I think the only, we both had ULM. That makes a lot of sense. They're facing St. Francis. We don't need to dwell on that. App State,
please don't lose.
Exactly. App State is going to Charlotte, and I wanted to
played in the Panthers Stadium.
I did want to talk to you about this game just because it feels weird that we both. I don't know about you, but I easily had Charlotte here. And, we talked about App State in the preseason, all the changes that they've been going through, kind of the uncertainty now, given that last year wasn't one of those years that was up to their standards. But it's still Charlotte, and like that felt weird to me, but I just don't know that I can pick App State for this.
That was the one I waffled on, I will be honest. I had App at first. I saw that we had differed, and I was like, maybe it'd be good to have some, one more that we didn't have the same on, because there's a bit of sameness for this week. But I thought about it more, and there was a lot of favorites going on. I didn't really have a ton of underdogs. App is a 4.5 point favorite in this one. It's on a neutral site. It's in Charlotte at the Panther Stadium. I kind of assume it's going to be an App lean just because they are a bigger, more ferocious fan base, and I think there's probably some excitement about a new coach. I'm a little skeptical about the Dow Loggins hire, which was not helped by the fact that his quote this week to media was that there was, quote, 2.5 or 3 guys still in the mix for the starting quarterback. I'm not sure on the math there with who the half person is that is competing for this job, but you always are worried about 2 quarterbacks. So if you're introducing a third, where you're still into game week and not deciding on a quarterback, and even handling it that way in the media, doesn't it make me feel better? And so the other part of this one is it's not so much a rivalry in the sense of I think App State believe they are a better program than Charlotte by a good measure. And they've enjoyed handily beating them since they joined the subdivision and since Charlotte started the football program. So this would be a certain sting in the tail for App State football in Dow Loggins' first game if they do not win this one. So it's not like it'd be anxiety bowl situation for him in game 1, but that would be starting on the entire wrong foot. And yet, Charlotte's new head coach, Tim Albin, I like quite a bit. Ohio's teams the last couple of years since he took over for Frank Solich, they've been good. Gritty, play good defense, maybe bring in a bit of the Maction to the American. We'll see how it looks, and I certainly have a lot less certainty on who is playing for them and what they're going to look like. I don't really know. I'm kind of making a blind guess here, but I'm got questions about App State. I've got more questions because I've looked at them more, but that is leading me to pick Charlotte for this one. And certainly I think it would have large implications for the season. It probably is the, of these teams playing, I don't even know how to say it, but if they're 0-1, it feels like the biggest deal of anyone else in the league, and they're not playing an FCS opponent. It's not it's this massive upset. It would just, for what it would mean and the first impression it would be, man, it would be bad if Dow Loggins lost this one, I think. But we're both picking that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have said it better myself there. I just don't know that App State is trustworthy right now. That just feels like a blasphemous thing to say. I can't even say that with a straight face, but it's true.
They're like the boxer that's reeling. It's
right.
You're seeing them reel. It's are they going to get it again? And they've basically never been the boxer who's reeling. They've been the guy throwing the knockout punch, and so it is that tenuous time for them. Exactly. I feel like we can gloss over. I mean, we both. At least I said. I think down to 34.5. This thing is moving. This moved 4 points in a day. Beginning of this week, this was 38-ish. So
hey, late movement on Georgia State. Let's go.
I don't know what the Sharks know, but I still think we're getting to the point where Ole Miss winning by 34 wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. Even Georgia State plays decently, but I'd still say Georgia State can play within that number. But I think it'll be a loss. Fade me if that is not how it ends up being.
So we differed on this next one, Southern Miss versus Mississippi State. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I did this based on vibes and not really anything relatively scientific. I just think that, given what Southern Miss gained from Coach Huff going there, and given kind of where Mississippi State is right now as a program, there's some people who think they'll take a decent, not decent, they will be less bad than they were last year.
I think they're taking a big step forward.
Yeah, okay.
I just think that Mississippi State will win.
I just didn't necessarily. I don't think that this game is going to be anything that crazy, personally. So I just figured it'd be fun to just throw some hat under the fire of Southern Miss here.
Well, certainly, if we are not counting Sunbelt teams, I am wrong. That would be the biggest alarm fire. Like that might be like Jeff Lebby doesn't survive the weekend if they lose this one in Hattiesburg. But
certainly would.
My reasoning on the football side is, I like Braylon Braxton. Great quarterback. Importing in Blake Anderson is a very savvy offensive coordinator hired to make. He's a lot of experience in that realm. I don't know how quickly the defense is going to come together, and Mississippi State should be able to bring the firepower on offense. And so I just kind of think it's a situation where Southern Miss will be game. Like they even could play within 2 touchdowns for sure, but they might just get outscored too much. So that's kind of where I think with that one.
That's fair. And that's kind of what I thought with the next one. Indiana football. Indiana is hosting Old Dominion this week, and I don't think that there is going to be a more fascinating team this year because Indiana had never done what they did last year. Yes, they made the playoffs, so I'm not talking about that specifically. But that Indiana football team was not what Indiana fans have ever really experienced. And I think, you and I both think that Old Dominion will be decent this year. So if I was an Indiana fan, I would be worried that this game is closer for longer than you would probably like. I think if Old Dominion is capable of rising to, the heights that they are this year, that this is probably going to be a game. But we'll say into halftime and, kind of readjust there. I do think Indiana will come away with it. I think ultimately they are pretty talented still this year. And then I also looked at Coach Cignetti's history versus Old Dominion, and it was relatively good. So, it's not like, obviously he's dealing with better athletes now than before, but, this was still a school that didn't necessarily give Coach Cignetti issues. And it's still, the same coaching trust. So, but I do think this will be one of the better G5 Power 5 matchups this week. Power 4.
Yeah, I think closer than the experts think. But Indiana probably wins, although would be an announcement of sorts for Old Dominion to get this one. And certainly with the way that, the counter from SEC teams, as we just went through all the schedule stuff, is that Indiana's, I think, playing ODU, Kennesaw, and an FCS, Indiana State maybe, as their non-con this year. And so as he's kind of, people made a lot about their schedule as they went 11-1 last year, made the playoff, scheduling similar this year non-con. If he got by one of the G5s he scheduled, it certainly would be of the ironic variety of losses. I don't think it'll happen, but that is certainly, I guess, that you will have SEC fans, if it happens, very happy all across social media, because I think he's kind of reached their rooting for my downfall type of levels with the SEC fandom.
Certainly is. And, with Indiana, we'll see them how good they are relatively quickly. They're 3 games after the non-con that you said. They host Illinois, who's ranked right now. They're at Iowa, and then they're at Oregon, and Oregon should be good again. So, certainly will be put up or shut up time pretty quickly for them.
I think we can probably blaze through these next few pretty quickly. Kirby doesn't ever really seem to care about what the score is, but I don't think Georgia will have trouble with Marshall.
The question for Georgia is just, how does the QB look? That's it.
Yeah, just offense. We had questioned about how Lane Kiffin handles these situations. We kind of know with Kirby. He just doesn't really, he knows he's not going to lose these games, and so yeah, it might be like a 2-score game at halftime or whatever. And people are like, what's going on? And it's just never a problem. Coastal Carolina at Virginia. It would have been weird to think about Virginia being a 12.5-point favorite against Coastal, especially some of these really good Coastal teams. I kind of buy it. There's some juice behind Virginia in a year where Tony Elliott needs it to happen for the Cavaliers. And Coastal, we mentioned last time, Emmett Brown out for the year. I don't really know who's playing quarterback. It sounded like they'd named a starter, but hadn't committed to not playing 2 or 3 guys. So again, the same with the App State situation. I just don't see this clicking right away for them this year. And then James Madison hosting Weber State. Been a good FCS program of recent years, or over the last decade, a playoff team. But JMU has leveled up at this point, and I think that difference will come across. That was a big trip. Also a long trip over from Utah over to the mountains of the valleys of Harrisonburg.
Certainly is. Arkansas State should be fine. South Alabama should be fine. Troy hosting Nichols should be fine.
Only one there, Nichols beat Incarnate Word. I think it was a top 5 FCS team in week 0. But yeah, I guess to fill it out for the people who aren't watching, Arkansas State plays SEMO, Southeast Missouri State. South Alabama hosts Morgan State. So this is the run of FCS games at 7, all of them at 7 Eastern. Probably no one has trouble there, and everyone. I don't think any FCS teams get a Sunbelt team this year. But of those, I'd say Nichols, just because you don't really know what Troy is, and because Nichols looks pretty good. But probably no drama there in the Sunbelt West.
Probably not. And then I think Eastern Michigan, Texas State. Sorry about Texas State leaving the conference, but, I think we both think that should be a relatively easy game for them.
That'll just be like, how does Brad Jackson look? They named the starter first homegrown guy, quote unquote, for G.J. Kinney at quarterback, which was a pivot because he's brought in some transfers to some success. But he wants to bring this guy along, and so this will be his first time in the spotlight. EMU's one of those teams that could grind them into the dust, but if they are not able to keep it at their kind of pace, and Texas State can do what they want to do offensively, I just couldn't see how they'd keep up. And yeah, they're leaving the Sun Belt, but it won't be till a pivotal game with Louisiana that the refs come out and do a Montreal screw job on Texas State for leaving the league. They're not gonna try and do that in the non-con. Exactly. Texas State's fine for now.
Exactly. And then full disclosure, we have none of the same picks for the rest of these games.
Louisiana is also hosting Rice. I think Louisiana is going to win the West. So if they're losing a game like this against a first-time head coach, first game with the new head coach with Rice, then that's not going to happen. So I think they'll handle business in their newly renovated stadium in Lafayette. And then yes, dissension the rest of the way.
Apologies, thought we hit the Louisiana Rice game. I will just say the games and the picks, and then, we can talk about whatever we want to out of them. Doesn't have to be super long. One more Sunbelt game in the works. Georgia Southern is on the road at Fresno State. And then some of the bigger games this week, Texas, Ohio State. Texas is at Ohio State. I believe that was a 1-2, but is no longer because of preseason rankings,
different polls. It's a 1-2 in the coaches one, so it counts.
Functionally a 1-2 to me.
That'll be on the broadcast probably.
Yes.
So if they're going to use it, then it's a 1-2.
Got to. LSU is facing Clemson, and then Notre Dame, Miami. I'll start with the Georgia Southern one because that one I'm a little surprised that we had some dissension there. I think it ultimately comes down to Georgia Southern. I think is good. I know last year they opened up the year at Boise State, and that was kind of the Jeffrey.
They hosted.
Excuse me.
That one was at home.
You're right. That was at home. That was the Jeffrey, coming out party. But I feel like this is a good Georgia Southern team. Begrudges me to say that. And I don't think that Fresno State is going to be able to keep up with their offense. Whether or not Georgia Southern's defense is, able to improve from what they were last year, that to me is their biggest question as they try to go to the conference championship game. But for now, to me, Georgia Southern's offense being the difference maker here, I think it'll travel. I know it's a road game, but that type of offense, especially with the continuity at quarterback, they're going to travel well, in my humble opinion.
Certainly, you're within your rights to do that. And fading Fresno after they played week 0 and looked pretty bad against Kansas on the road. But I kind of think there's a possibility of overreacting to that. Power conference team, jazzed up in their new stadium, and also it was their first game, which is what Georgia Southern will have this week. And so, first game, taking a long trip, playing a team who's gotten time to dust off the cobwebs, so to speak. I think it'll be kind of a coin flipping game either way, so I don't necessarily see a blowout in one direction or the other, no matter what. But I'm just giving the edge to the home team, who's had a chance to work out some of their kinks in the early season. I mean, they couldn't run the ball at all against Kansas, and so
even a little bit. It was actually concerning.
If that remains the same in this one, then that would be the case for Georgia Southern winning this one in a pretty hefty margin. But I think that they find a way to have more success. That's an area that Georgia Southern's defense had struggled in recent years. So, for no other reason, it's probably the one I feel least confident of that I picked. But just kind of a gut on this one. Going against the consensus a bit, because Fresno had been a slight favorite at home in this one before last week, and immediately over the course of the weekend flipped to being a home dog.
That's fair.
So,
that's fair.
I am bucking convention here, for sure.
It's early season, so this is the time to do it. Next, we have Texas, Ohio State. I think I'm not surprised you picked Texas. And I guess the reason I'm not surprised is despite my earlier comments in the beginning of this pod, I think Texas... Last year was the year that they really put it together. Yes, they didn't end up winning the national championship, and I get that, and that's fine. But they were so close, and they were very overmatched in that game with Ohio State. Okay, fine. If what people are saying in the preseason is true, and Arch Manning is like Texas being number 1 overall doesn't surprise me at all, given what everybody else lost, given who left for the draft and all the transfers and stuff like that. They're returning a good bit, and Arch Manning, I believe he was a 5-star 2 years ago, and he's just sat behind a solid quarterback in Quinn's right. But now it's his time. We've talked about development, and we haven't seen a lot of it over the last couple of years, and that's fine. But this is a guy who has actually done that. So, I think it would certainly scare Texas if he is bad. But I don't know that we can say that he is until we just see him on the field. I think this will be a close game. It's a very close line. Ohio State, they're still Ohio State. I know that, like I said, they lost a good bit from last year. Do you know who their quarterback is? I don't know that I saw who's going to start.
It'd be Julian Sayin.
Okay.
So another young guy. So both are debuting new quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Both lose some from their teams that just made the college football playoff semifinals, in which they played each other. I just kind of think Texas's defense might have more, might have enough. Like you say, I don't expect a blowout in this one, but it's kind of just Texas is set up. They feel more poised to compete again at that top echelon with what they didn't lose, what they do bring back. And probably just a lot of expectation. Arch might be better than Julian Sayin right now. But we'll find out when they line up together in the same stadium. I guess I'm just backing all the road. I feel like me being road teams was a big thing last year. I'm doing it again because I'm on Texas. I'm on LSU and LSU Clemson, and I am on Notre Dame and Notre Dame Miami.
LSU surprised me.
I'm buying the LSU thing. If it clicks, they could be national title good. If they don't, uncomfortable situations, Baton Rouge. But they've got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. They brought in some pieces to complement him. I think there's some idea that they lose 2 really good offensive linemen, but the unit as a whole, if they got the right pieces, could be better. Not more talented, but just a better unit. And I'm zagging while everyone's kind of on being a bit out on Brian Kelly. I still think he's a good coach, and this is the year he's going to need it to happen. But I still like Clemson a ton, but I just think in this moment it might be LSU just gets it done. And also, by the way, all these on non-neutral sites, way to go. And again, like I was saying earlier,
absolutely.
If this is continuing to be part of the non-conference as this is the new scheduling arrangement, you're going to see more of this. That's a positive no matter what it means for everyone else. Just because yeah, just get these games out of Mercedes and get these games out of these neutral sites. You got to play them on campus, and so you're getting out with 3 in a row here with some marquee matchups in week 1. When coaches realized they were going to pay a penalty for it,
right?
I think that it's starting to go away, and I think that's all for the better.
Exactly. I think my thing with Clemson is, one, I do feel like they're back. And I am not specifically a Brian Kelly hater, but these types of games feel like the games that Kelly loses. You're out on him for for September, and then you look up at the end of October, early November, and realize that LSU has this loss and like only one other loss or no other losses, and they're still absolutely in the running on things. And I think that's kind of how I think their season is going to go.
Also have not won a season opener under him. So
exactly.
It's a capital S story going into this one.
It certainly is. And I think, Klubnik is, I don't know that I think he is a good quarterback. I think he is a serviceable one. And he, talent-wise specifically, he is worse than the Nuss Bus. This is not me, making any drastic proclamations.
Maybe.
It could be a situation where they both play down to each other, if you will. But I think in terms of potential,
Cade being the dude. I don't know if that's just people talking themselves into it or not, but people think Cade might be an NFL guy now, and that was not necessarily the case a year ago, 2 years ago.
I respectfully, let's talk about that not before week 1, because I don't know what has happened in practice. I have seen that man throw some horrendous passes, not just the decision making, but the actual arm talent. So unless they, shot the arm with something crazy, legal and crazy, I just don't see it personally. So,
and then I just think Notre Dame's a better team. I'm not super, super low on Miami. I think it'll be fine, They might not be where they want to be as far as top of the sport good, but I just think Notre Dame, they're starting a new quarterback, CJ Carr, it's whatever. I just think the team is very good, and they won in that stadium on their run to the national title game last year. A lot of Irish will make that trip, I'm sure. I just think Notre Dame is a better team. They'll get it done on the road.
Yeah, I don't hate that, honestly. I just didn't know what their QB situation is going to be like. Carr just is not somebody we have a ton of information on, so I just kind of leaned into the Miami of it all. I don't think that this is, they're playing at home, I tend to like teams like this when they're quote-unquote toss-ups. I tend to like home teams. You feel good when you're there at home.
Clearly, I don't.
Yes, clearly you do
I
not.
Hate that. Don't play at home.
But, at the same time, though, the thing with Miami is they're also, do we know how good Carson Beck is going to be? Do we know that he's going to end up being the guy that was, good for Georgia? I don't know. I don't know what that team is going to look like, and that's what makes these week 1 picks of the marquee matchups so hard to me, because there's a lot of questions and we have no additional data right now. And that's what's fun about this, right? You could have had a perfect week, or I could have had a perfect week here. But it'll be a good game. I do think it'll be a good game. But we'll talk about this later, I suppose, but I'm not sure how I feel about Notre Dame this year in terms of them repeating as the runner-ups or just being at that level. I know that they changed the way that the playoff works just a little bit, but
if you have them losing this game, that also helps your case there, because most of the biggest optimistic case for them is they just don't have a super tough schedule. So if they get this one, they'll be in a pretty good spot to make it back, and then it's just kind of about who's hot at the right time at that point. But
that's fair.
We'll all find out. I think we got to work in this week 1 for us to probably want to hit a little lower time on the pick'em next time, after being we're not going to talk about the games we both picked. We certainly did a bunch of that, so we'll clean it up. We'll look at the film. We'll adjust next week. We'll get it right, especially because we're going to have 2 Georgia State games to talk about in that pod. So we're not going to ever try and get in a situation where we're having 2-hour podcasts. And I think if we had our a druthers about us. We would certainly want to do that, talking about all these games, just because we're excited that the season's back. Georgia State, obviously a chief part of that, but just wall-to-wall college football besides. And this week you're going to have games all the way to Monday night.
Plus, also, there's more.
Then the NFL starts, and you've got everything.
Yeah, there's obviously more Sun Belt games to talk about since no one's on bye and nobody is playing each other. And I believe that immediately changes in week 2.
Yeah, that will also help just have less games to speak of. But I don't know we're going to do anything with this other than we'll track the standings. Bragging rights are on the line for sure. I've already forgotten who won last year, which maybe means it was David, but I honestly just don't remember who won.
I think it was by
clearly
like 4. It wasn't anything crazy.
But we'll keep track of that. You can play along as well. Like I say, current situation, we're getting these uploaded. We're still working through a bit of tech gremlins, but this should be showing up if you're listening to this for on Thursday proper. It should certainly be on the YouTube. Past that, trying to do a lot more of the things that I've neglected to do that people always say on podcasts, and I was like, I don't know why people say that, and then I realized why people say that. Anytime you can, if you watch our video, you like it, subscribe to the YouTube, whatever you are listening to. If you're listening to a podcast, subscribe to that output. We're primarily going to go through Spotify now, but wherever you listen to is fine. Leave a review, like it. That stuff helps. Subscribing to the YouTube, which we are pushing more and more. If my subtle mentioning it of a couple of times an episode has not been clear, trying to use that more, trying to put stuff out more on that outlet. The Ask the Expert stuff is going to keep rolling. Should be putting the podcast up there as well. And just, whatever else comes up. I mean, when I go to practices or go to media availabilities, post games, if that stuff is stuff that you like seeing, I can try and get those up as well every time, and just still kind of a vessel to give everyone the coverage they're looking to get from Georgia State athletics. And so as we're going through this feeling out process, certainly every feedback helps, but thanks again for listening. I hope you're as happy that we are that football is back, and we'll be back on next episode to see how the game goes in Vaught Hemingway Stadium when Georgia State lines it up against the Ole Miss Rebels.